We have a guest, Steven Donzinger. Can you see me, and can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I can see you and hear
Very
you.
good.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. You've been following the events in the last minutes and maybe hours and days. I mean, it's an incredible chain of events that we're witnessing.
Just extraordinary. And first of all, congratulations to Julian and his family. I've had the great honor of getting to know Gabriel and Stella a bit and others who have worked so hard on his campaign for freedom. And I honestly didn't know if this day would come, and I'm so happy it's here. And those of us on this side of the ocean who have worked on Julian's behalf are really just over the moon today. So we're thrilled. I don't know the latest news. It's really early in the morning here. Did Julian get to Australia yet?
We were just watching a live feed just minutes ago. Maybe in the last 20 minutes ago, that when he landed, he walked off the plane, waved to the people there, raised his fist in victory, and then met Stella and embraced her. And it was such an emotional moment that I could hear sobbing on my end here among the people. It was really moving. So he is home. He is with Stella. He is with the family finally. So the moment has come, which is such a great step to have, and such a great ending to the saga that has so many dark sides. But today we're focusing on the victory, the good sides, the victory of goodness, the victory of all the people who were supportive, people like yourself, who understood the importance of this battle. We still have, of course, the lingering question. Then that now what? What is the implication? You're going through your battle as well. Tell me about
Yes.
it, and how. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I first of all, I'm just so happy for Julian. For those who don't know, I spent almost 3 years in detention, in the United States, at home and in prison, after a judge charged me with criminal contempt of court for refusing to turn my computer over to Chevron, the Chevron oil company, because I was a lawyer for indigenous peoples in the Amazon, fighting Chevron over pollution. That's a long story for another day, but I'll say that I always related to Julian on a number of levels. I mean, one is his courage. He was really an inspiration to me, for many years. And, while what I had to deal with really pales in comparison to what he had to deal with, the reality is we both had to deal with this system here in the United States that tries to crush people who are a little too successful at speaking truth to power. And that's really what it boils down to. What Julian and WikiLeaks did is they exposed some serious, misconduct, war crimes by the U.S. military. And the system tried to absolutely crush him. And, my work involved exposing an oil company's pollution, and a pro-corporate judge aligned with the oil company to have me locked up for no reason in a case condemned by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention of the United Nations. So, kind of the reality right now is Julian pled to a felony count, I believe, but he now needs a pardon from President Biden.
Yeah.
A message needs to be sent to journalists that you can do your job in a world, in a rule of law, a purportedly rule of law country, where you are allowed to work with whistleblowers and expose government corruption. By the way, I'm also seeking a pardon from President Biden right now for my criminal misdemeanor conviction, centered around my refusal to give Chevron my confidential case file in a case that we're still fighting. So, I would say that this is a huge step forward for Julian. I think President Biden has a lot more work to do to make it right.
I totally agree. I totally agree, and I think that the fight needs now to start, like your fight, for the pardoning of Julian, a full cleaning of the slate. It's such a
Yes.
ridiculous outcome, and commentators have been pointing out to this fact that, in this plea deal, I mean, you have, for the first time in the United States history, a court process where it's criminalization of journalism. It is.
Yeah.
This document is talking about journalism. He's guilty of asking for information. He's guilty of possessing information and publishing the information to the general public. There is no nuances here. There is no talk about hacking or harm. It is absolutely accepted, and it was accepted by the judge who actually mentioned that as a very important feature when she was processing this plea deal in the courts in the Northern Mariana Islands, that it was a confirmation. Nobody has been harmed. So why paying the price for this work that Julian did? What a price! So, but for the first time, you now have this. Maybe not a legal precedent per se for future persecution or prosecution. In the Julian's case, it's the same thing, but a latent precedent that could surface again, and that needs to go away. We cannot have that, and I hope you agree. In America, that precedent that. You have a court-stamped sentencing to imprisonment 5 years, which Julian has served for doing journalism. That is unacceptable. Do you agree?
Totally agree. And, go back to the Obama presidency. President Obama refused to push this case.
Yeah.
And there was a huge constituency in what I would call the national security apparatus of the U.S. government, the Pentagon, the CIA, that wanted to go after Julian, and Obama resisted that. Trump, Biden did not. So this is an incredibly dangerous precedent. I will say that I'm so happy Julian is now home, but we have to recognize, as Julian does and his lawyers do, that this is a real problem. And it's designed to send a message to journalists who expose government wrongdoing, corruption, and criminality. That's what this is designed to do, this plea. So, again, that needs to be fixed. And I think the campaign to free Julian is now very appropriately going to transition to a campaign to solve this problem now, this new problem that comes out of his freedom, which is this, wholesale criminalization of journalism. I mean, the problem of trying to criminalize journalists or lawyers, as in my case, is an increasing problem in the United States and across the world. We've seen this in a lot of countries. It's still, maybe I'm naive, it still shocks me to see it in the United States to the degree that we're seeing it right now. Julian's case is a leading example. My case is another big example, but we're seeing it with a lot of cases involving climate activists in the United States right now, where people are being sent to prison for long periods of time for committing acts of peaceful civil disobedience against the fossil fuel industry. We're seeing, activists like in Atlanta, the Cop City protesters are being charged under the RICO statute as racketeers in an attempt to criminalize First Amendment protected protests. That's a case against people protesting a new police training facility in Atlanta, in the state of Georgia, in the United States. So we're seeing this model of criminalization intensify. And I think Julian's case, in many respects, was the impetus for some of this that is now applying to other people. So the other point I'd mention is not only does the plea deal that freed Julian really represent a wholesale attack on traditional journalism. It also is a model to go after protesters, activists who challenge the power structure. It's really become part of a wave by the establishment, be it the government or corporate America, to try to criminalize protest as a way to protect themselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I mean, as you mentioned, the obvious intent of the administration, the powers here, is to send a message to journalists that we can make life hell for you if we don't like your journalism. And of course, in essence, Julian pled guilty of the crime to commit journalism, so to speak. But we need to send a countermeasure to journalists. You don't want to have this hanging over your head.
No.
You don't want that example, and you have to resist, and you have to have courage to actually come together and put aside any difference you have, because this is I'm not saying maybe an existential threat, but it would have been if Julian had been transported to the Eastern District of Virginia and faced trial for all the indictment that they were throwing at him originally with 175 years. But still, this lingers on. This is a threat to your ability to do your job and your commitment to serve the public in your capacity as a journalist. Don't you agree? They need to understand now. We need to fight for that understanding.
Yes, I think that's totally true. And what I'll say on that point, it's critically important that the leading press organizations in the United States in particular start speaking out right now about the point you're making. You know, the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, and many of these papers published the materials that WikiLeaks found and released that expose U.S. military wrongdoing in Iraq and other types of wrongdoing. Where are they? They need to really speak up and unite and demand that President Biden issue a full pardon. You know, this can't be a half measure. The half measure was to get Julian home to his family. Okay. The full measure is to correct this injustice such that journalism can be protected fully. Okay. Right now, there is this lingering, hovering threat to journalists who do their jobs to expose government wrongdoing as a result of this plea agreement. Again, that needs to be fixed, and it can only be fixed right now by the President of the United States. And I think it would behoove him to do it soon, like now, prior to the November election. I think people are hungering for this. I think it'll show the world, you know, his own constituents in the United States, but also the world, that this is a priority, that freedom, free press, free speech is a priority for this administration. So, you know, it's in the news now, and I think President Biden must act now. And by the way, while he's at it, he should pardon me too.
I totally agree, Steven. I mean, I totally agree. There's been a tendency among journalists to sort of shy away from admitting that Julian actually is a part of the club, that he is somehow different, that there was, there's some allegation of hacking, and he's not a real journalist and all that. Actually, the plea agreement, and as it's laid out and signed by, you know, the highest authorities in the Department of Justice, actually has taken that away. Because, you know, not only is there admittance that there is in the restitution chapter of this plea agreement in black and white, as of the day of the plea agreement, the United States has not identified any victim qualifying for individual restitution, and thus is not requesting an order of restitution. No harm. And secondly, no mention of computer violation, no mention of hacking. It didn't take place. It was bogus the entire time. This is a document, a plea to commit journalism. So it's on you now. We have to say that to journalists. It's on you now to fight for this to be cleaned out. And,
I mean, I would couple of points. I mean, I would argue that plea agreement that Julian agreed to is really an exoneration of everything Julian and the Free Assange campaign has been saying for years and years and years. I mean, it's an admission by the government that the
I
allegations
agree.
against him, really the false narrative, it was a false narrative the U.S. government was putting out for years, is exposed. It's crazy, right? I mean, they get him to sign a plea deal, but in the plea deal, they expose their own misconduct. And I think that's a really important way to look at this plea deal. It's not an admission of guilt by Julian. It's a ticket to get back to his family, and an admission by the U.S. government that their allegations against Julian for years that kept him in the most horrendous conditions for 12 years, conditions of confinement, 5 years in Belmarsh, were just simply fraudulent. And, you know, their propaganda campaign against Julian was, you can't argue, it was effective to some degree, because people, at least in this country, tend to believe the government. I mean, a lot of people just believe the government when they say something about a person, or the system says something about a person. I felt it myself. Like, I feel like I'm a really good person. But when Chevron went after me and the judge went after me, it harmed my reputation, and I couldn't stop it, except by speaking out, like Julian and his allies and his supporters have spoken out. So, I would argue that plea deal is an admission of wrongdoing by the U.S. government. That's really what that plea deal is. And by the way, for those who want to learn more about this, I always have to put in a plug for my friend Nils Meltzer, who wrote the astoundingly fabulous book called The Trial of Julian Assange. Nils, for those who don't know, is a human rights lawyer, was the former UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, who didn't know Julian and started to investigate the case and ended up writing a book about it that explains the entire case from top to bottom, start to finish, against Julian, that explains that the U.S. government was really concocting, manufacturing allegations to punish him, not for any criminality, but for engaging in traditional award-winning journalism that exposed government wrongdoing. So people who want to learn more about this, I encourage them to buy the book, The Trial of Julian Assange by Nils Meltzer. By the way, it's an astoundingly interesting book. Obviously not just about Julian's case, but as a way to understand how the U.S. government and its allies, including the Australian government at the time, worked together to try to criminalize journalism, criminalize Julian, because he embarrassed the U.S. government and exposed war crimes committed by the U.S. military in Iraq.
Absolutely right, Steven. I really thank you for being on this live stream in this happy moment. And you're absolutely right. The fight continues. And let's start now the fight for the pardon of Julian Assange and you. Thank you much, Steven.
And by the way, let me throw one more name, Leonard Peltier, who's been in prison almost 50 years, great indigenous rights leader in the United States, who's terrible health problems. He's being punished for a crime he did not commit, and he also deserves a pardon. And I'm urging President Biden to pardon Julian, pardon Steven Donziger, pardon Leonard Peltier. And I could probably send a list of a few more names too if he's interested. But today is a day to celebrate
indeed
Julian's freedom. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steven. And we are now going to continue the live streaming until we wait for the signal to come from a press conference, I hope, in Canberra, where we'll hear from people who are traveling on this journey, and from Stella and from others.